Hello, friends, and welcome to the podcast. You know, I talk a lot about electronic music, and hopefully nobody's confused and thinking that I'm talking about like present day electronica, like techno and, trance and whatever, house, whatever. I love that stuff. I love the evolution of electronic music, but I really am fascinated with the origins of it. And there are some really pretty ancient, unexpectedly to some people, ancient origins of electronic music that goes way back, to things like soundtracks to 50s sci-fi movies like Forbidden Planet and BBC Workshop and even artists like performance artist type people, musicians that would put together soundscapes of electronically generated tones, things like that. But I think I like to concentrate on the sort of more musical use of synthesizers as opposed to the soundscape kind of things in the early days. I love the soundtrack to Forbidden Planet, but it's not like music that you put on and it's more like it was creating a tonal space. In the idea being that this was the music of an alien race on a faraway planet. It wasn't necessarily musical. I mean, they called it electronic tonalities, so it wasn't like you. I guess you could score it if you really wanted to. You could write the notes down, but it's not like what you might call music. It leans more towards tonalities, soundscape-ish kind of stuff. But what I like to concentrate on is the people that were using it as a musical tool in the early days. I mean, everybody uses synthesizers now, but back in the early days, there was it was a novelty thing. You would find, I mean, the word Moog, Moog, which is the last name of one of the people who popularized the synthesizer gear. Robert Moog put together consumer keyboards that used synthesizer. They had the oscillators and everything, all the knobs and things that you see. There's certainly other people that developed the electronics, but he put it together, I think, in a way that was available to consumers and a little bit more consumer friendly. People, I mean, a lot of the people that used synthesizers were very technical. There was a lot of patch chords and you had to really, learning curve was crazy. But if you could put together something that that one of the Monkees could get into, or the Beatles, or somebody could buy one of these things and immediately start finding usable sounds and playing them musically on a keyboard, that I think is what Robert Moog did. And when his Moog synthesizer came out, there were people who were using it in ways that took so much time and effort to develop the songs. I've talked about Wendy Carlos, and then Larry Fast, but people like Wendy Carlos put together music early on, orchestral recreations of orchestral classical music, where she would play each part and then rewind the tape, overdub the next part. Like she would play one violin, and then rewind the tape, and then listening to the first violin, add the second violin, etc., until she had created the entire orchestra. It was a very intensive way to build music, but that was, they had, the synthesizers could only play one note at a time. But then there were some other people who came along who kind of exploited the novelty of it, and suddenly there were tons of records that were like, the Moog Beatles and the Moog everything got a Moog version. There was like, Tijuana Brass done with the Moog synthesizer, and there were a lot of those kind of novelty things where people who weren't necessarily as finessed with their musical skills would just do these recreations of popular songs, a popular style of music, like rock and roll Moog. And you can find a lot of those online. You can probably, find 10 million of them. But They're fun in some ways. They're very sort of kitschy and a little bit tacky in a weird way. But I think they came from the idea. There was an album that Wendy Carlos did called By Request, where she played a bunch of different sort of popular songs. But they're done in her style, which is, again, that sort of meticulous building of parts after parts, layers and layers. So her version of it is good. But then there's a ton of sort of, these lesser, not so good Moog albums that came out. But then there was a guy in Japan who was, I bet, inspired by Wendy Carlos and inspired by the Moog vibe, the whole idea, and had done some soundtrack music and was already a skilled musician. Isao Tomita, this guy. This is one of his albums. He's done some things a lot like what Wendy Carlos did, where he has recreated classical music layer by layer, very similar to what Wendy Carlos was doing. But I think Tomita is doing it in a more of a playful way, a little bit more whimsical in his approach to things like that. His sounds, I think maybe he wasn't going for the exact replica of a viola or a flute. He was sort of exploiting the electronic sounds of synthesizers. He was taking it into strange realms and otherworldly realms. His records tended to be kind of spacey, kind of like space music in a way, whereas Wendy Carlos's electronic music albums were leaned more towards, legitimate classical music records, and had that sort of gravitas of classical music and the sound of classical music, but with that sort of twist, that made that it's not an acoustic orchestra. But Tomita went all the way into electronics land. There was no doubt that what he was playing was a synthetic instrument, and it was, what he did was very fun. There was a couple of his albums that were, like Snowflakes Are Dancing, and his versions of, Prokofiev, and very familiar things, Pictures at an Exhibition, things like that we're all familiar with. And he pushed it into space music zone, like cosmic areas. And this album, when this came out, is called the Bermuda Triangle, and very mystical, very mysterious. There's airplanes flying into the Bermuda Triangle and kind of this devil head here. So you're getting some sort of science fiction oriented music here. There's a guy on the back with a mermaid, and there's a cool vibe to this album. Also, what's really cool is it had a sticker on the front, and it said, comes in orange coral vinyl, which they said this was like coral color, which is super cool. I think orange vinyl, back when this came out, colored vinyl was kind of a novel back then. But this album is so much fun to listen to. Again, like I say about a lot of things like this, put on the headphones, go into this record. It will take you on the journey. And there's a really interesting moment on here where at the time Close Encounters of the Third Kind had come out, and that was, the music from that was really popular. So there's a little moment on here where he does an homage to the notes in Close Encounters, that thing that shows up in there. And when the record came out, I remember thinking that was a little tacky, and it was like, it kind of takes you out of his world and puts you into this, American movie. And I really wanted to be completely his world. But now when I listen to it, it doesn't really hurt that much. It's not that jarring anymore. But the rest of the album has there's some classical music on here that's been reinterpreted and kind of, put into another dimension, into that Tomita, alternate dimension of reality. But the sounds on here are great. He really experimented with sound and with the tones, the tonalities. There's minimalism on here. There's kind of moments where you get the feeling of ambience. And that, again, that feeling of when you put the headphones on, you close your eyes, you're sort of in another place. And when you keep listening to it, if you let yourself go there, you can just go on this, this electronic music journey with Tomita. It's really diverse album. There's a lot of different parts on there, different segments and pieces that take you through these different feelings. And it's a bit, there's like scary moments, intense sort of science fiction moments. But there's also this kind of whimsical vibe to it. There are voices on there that he created in the synthesizer, like these sort of synthesized vowel sound voices that seem to be talking to each other and like maybe speaking to each other on the radio or something like that. It's mysterious and perhaps alien voices or the voices of the doomed pilots. And it kind of takes you, it's sort of cinematic, which is another word I use a lot in a good way. Cinematic. And it's a real good example of what you can do with electronic musical instruments. There's a lot of processing and playing with notes and how they bend and how they reverberate. Some things have no reverb and they sound like they're really close to your ear. Other things have this vastness to them. They sound like they're in a massive cathedral, and then it'll come in really close to your ear. And there are some big sounds on there too, where I don't know how many layers of overdubs, but these big orchestral landscapes, and then that'll swoosh down into a smaller piece of music. It's a fun record to listen to. It is, like I say before about these kinds of artists, it is proto-electronica, in the way that's now, I guess, referred to as like IDM or EDM, which the DM part stands for dance music, which this is not really dance music in the terms of what you hear now with techno, where it's got this sort of beat. There's a certain beat that is like almost like a preset. You hit that and then you compose on top of that beat. It's not techno like that, but there are things on here that hint at it, that hint at things like Boards of Canada or the Orb, things like that, and Orbital and groups like that, where you feel like you're getting this electronic landscape. Is taking you on a journey, but Tomita doesn't have the dance beat. He doesn't have that techno beat going. So maybe that's the only difference. I don't know. Anyway, I really like Tomita. I mean, pretty much everything he did is kind of fun, and it's fun like I said, in kind of a whimsical sort of I don't know. It's almost like a fantasy world of electronic music. Compared to Wendy Carlos's more serious musical realms of classical music. And then there's Larry Fast, who did a kind of music that was a little bit more sounded a little bit more like maybe what soundtrack music at the time was sounding like, more sort of towards orchestral sounds, but then again pushing into electronics. Tomita had funny parts in there, like quirky little noises that would pop up. You imagine anime when you listen to some Tomita records, and he actually did soundtracks for anime, so he's perfect for it. But yeah, check out Tomita. Maybe I'll talk about some of his other records too, because it's interesting to kind of go through the catalog sometimes and explore it and how he progressed from his earlier records to his somewhat middle and later albums. But anyway, I like it. I think maybe you like it. I don't know. Look them up on YouTube. Listen to it. See what you think. I might be completely weird. But anyway, thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you again real soon.